Welcome to Leading, a Cornerstone podcast that helps us pursue our mission of loving God, equipping believers, answering God's call, and declaring the good news. Thanks for joining us today. Here are your hosts.
Welcome back, Cornerstone. It's good to be back. I came back from a long trip last week. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing well. It sounds like from that long trip, it's one of those, I need a vacation from my vacation.
It was one of those vacation from the vacation, catch up on sleep, get over the jet lag, but it's
not
good.
yet.
It's
Not
good
yet.
doing
You can do that after this episode.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I appreciate you running back into town and running back to this podcast. We missed you.
Yeah, I heard you had a great chat with Pastor Jerry last week, so awesome.
Yeah, you know, Pastor Jerry is just... he's the man. I don't know what else to say. Like getting to sit down with him and go over really challenging, conversation through Matthew 18 when we're talking about humility,
forgiveness.
Yeah, forgiveness.
I'm glad I wasn't here for that one.
I appreciate that. Yeah, he got me in my feelings a little bit,
right?
And it was just
What's more convicting to hear a sermon and then have a chat with the pastor giving the convicting sermon about it?
Thank you again, Pastor Jerry. We appreciate having you on. It was a really good conversation, and I could sit down and talk to him forever,
sure.
right? He's just one of those guys who's just so compelling and draws you in with his, wealth of knowledge, and it was a great conversation. I was grateful for it.
Yeah, and today we're having a conversation on Matthew 19.
Yeah,
another challenging section about divorce.
Yeah,
and we're both married and happily married.
Yes.
I
like that. Yeah, wives out there, we are happily married. I agree.
Happily married. and it just a little bit more clarity provided by Pastor Jerry this weekend on kind of the maybe the confusion across maybe some of maybe what we've all been taught, or maybe what the world has fed us, and then again even amongst and across different churches and church teachings might have different perspectives. And I think that this past weekend provided a lot of clarity on kind of just going back to the original. What was the purpose of marriage, right? Let's not answer the question about divorce. Let's answer the question about marriage.
I think it's important to kind of see, like, they had a confusion thousands of years ago, right?
Yeah.
You see the Pharisees even trying to trick Jesus in this moment, see if they can catch him up on this question of divorce, but it was within their own confusion of like, well, what's the truth of this divorce, and is it a command, or is it something that we have just taken as law and want to make our own decisions with? So you could see why we've only muddied it up worse in the thousands of years since. And I think when we think about, yes, you and I, 10 years married, right, for both of us in our relationships with our wives, I think getting a chance today, I'm excited to talk about kind of where our stage is at, but also then talking about maybe those who are a little further down the road that have, maybe they have kids that are just married or recently married or going to be getting married, to have a chat about what that looks like. Yep. And also for those out there that are not yet married, getting a chance to talk about what that looks like and what Scripture's telling us. And I'm excited for us to just kind of unpack that.
Yeah. And, so to start, I think we have to answer, before we get into divorce, we have to answer the question about marriage, right? So what is the intent that God has for us in marriage? And if we think about what we've been reading in Matthew 19, it's all about relationships, right? And recognizing that we ourselves fall short, right? And so that naturally provides us, gives us challenges in building strong relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate my wife being able to have critical commentary with me, and I appreciate that she's had the patience to help me absorb it better. I didn't do so well in the beginning. I'm not one to hear critical commentary and to handle that well or accept it. Usually I'm pointing fingers back. And so to think about, and you talk about that, absolutely. It's about the relational aspect. It's about the oneness that we are trying to develop in and grow in, that that Jesus once again is reminding us of what marriage is, right? The leaving our parents and the cleaving together, and what that looks like, not just physically and not just with intimacy, but spiritually, and a life lived in unison and oneness together.
Yeah, and we've discussed how, in our singleness, I think there's definitely the freedom to serve the Lord, but there's also a space where we have a blind spot that our wives are able to help us become more sanctified, right? Because there is no responsibility to others. The sacrifice is different, but when in a marriage, I think what I've learned is I've learned to be less selfish, and more selfless. And then if God's blessed us with children, so I think that the next phase is now we understand what true sacrifice is. So in a marriage relationship, we've moved from the selflessness to having children where we become more sacrificial. And I think that's kind of like my progression of what I've seen that I would never have learned without being in this intimate relationship with someone who's basically my helper, and I'm her helper in trying to sanctify each other and identify some of the our shortfalls or shortcomings with our walks.
Yeah, I feel very in line with what you said there, like the way you phrased it about removing some of our selfishness and getting into more of a selfless place that you definitely don't see as a single individual. Right. I was a very selfish human being, still can be, but it was like you said, no one's pointing it out and there's no responsibility to it. How do you feel like you were able to hear of your selfishness and to be able to respond in a healthy manner? Like I said, I have moments where obviously I've fallen short, and now I'm grateful to be a little better about it. But for you, what are some of those things that you feel like you've kind of moved along in that conversation?
It's mostly in time and decisions. Am I doing something that I want to do versus something that we want to do, or maybe even sacrificing in that moment and doing something that she wants to do? In movies is a great example, right? Like I'm like the action comedy, almost an immature comedy type of movie selector.
It is why we get along so well. Immature comedy is our go-to.
Totally. And she's more of like a thinking, suspense drama and not something that it wouldn't be my first pick, right? And so I think the first act was that I realized that she was sacrificing for me was that we went to see, it was like Spider-Man 3 or one of the Spider-Man movies, and it was just not her cup of tea. And I really acknowledged the fact that, like, wow, she did that for me, because that's not the type of movie she likes. Right, and of course, Spider-Man. Who doesn't like Spider-Man? I mean, come on.
It's not the best of the options out there.
But that's what it is. It's being able to see that conversation, realizing that she sacrificed that 2-3 movies are 3 hours these days, like 3 hours of time to watch something that I wanted to watch. I think that the relationship is also a reflection of like how we choose to use our time and what are we sacrificing in terms of our relationship with Christ as well, right? Am I going to spend this time watching this show, or am I going to spend that time seeing 2 episodes ago, seeing what God has to say, hearing what God has to say, learning what God has to say, and what His will, and being aligned with His plans for us? That is all a mirror. Like the relationship for me is a mirror to point out some of the areas where I could use a little bit more work in my relationship with Christ.
Yeah, I think that's like an honest assessment of, are we utilizing the mirror?
Yeah.
Are we really looking at our actions and our choices and the things we're making, whether that's in our relationships with our wives or your spouse in general, if you're a woman watching this, but also are we looking at that in the way we take our relationship up with Christ?
Yeah.
And when we're looking at our marriages, right, this lifelong decision, that's how it's designed to be a lifelong decision that we've made. Are we looking at ways that we can be developing that spiritual oneness, that we can be practicing like safe intimacy and finding ways to mutually have sacrificial love?
Yeah.
Right? Those are the spaces that are defining whether or not those relationships are thriving or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Ephesians covers a lot of that marriage relationship with, the husband loving his wife as Christ loved the church and sacrificing for her, and then, wives loving their husbands. So Ephesians, another great area of the Bible to go and cover, to experience and then explore that oneness. I think, practically speaking, the question is, what does that oneness look like in your relationship with your spouse? How are you growing closer to one another? Right? We talked about how do we grow close and stronger in faith in God by praying and listening and reading the Bible, right? So similarly, if we're not communicating with our Heavenly Father and our Creator, then we're disconnected. We're not going to be as close. If you're not communicating with your spouse, you're probably not growing as close as you can. So we attended last year, or 2 years ago now, is a marriage retreat called Weekend to Remember by, I forget who hosts it. I think it's Focus on the Family.
I think you're right.
Yeah, and it's one of the speakers said, your relationship in general, but importantly, more specifically, your marriage relationship is not stagnant, right? You're constantly either moving towards each other or you're moving away. You don't just sit in one place. It's not stagnant, right? So are you moving towards one another through conversation, right? Because we could have conversations and still not grow close to each other, right? Because a conversation about weather or a conversation about, things at the surface level, is not going to be beneficial in growing close to one another, right? Are you having those conversations that really get behind the walls or the barriers? Are you having those conversations about spiritual growth? Are you having conversations about desires and goals and dreams and hopes and fears, right? Are you having honest conversations about flaws and things that bother you, right? Are we just being kind to one another, or are you really able to receive some correction? And that's where that deeper level intimacy is that, my wife and I can share things that bother us about each other and not be offended by it, right? We obviously have figured out a way to, or still figuring out, but we figured out some ways to communicate some of those things that when we are truly hurt, because that's what's going to happen. We're going to offend each other because we're both sinners. How do we communicate our hurt in a loving manner? And then, am I going to be, softness of heart to receive that correction, that feedback, and adjust my way of communicating or my actions that offend her?
Yeah, I think when we're looking at that, like, are we communicating with transparency?
Yeah.
Right? Are we laying all our cards on the table?
Yeah.
Right? And are we doing so in a loving manner?
Absolutely.
I think that's the bigger thing, is that we've got to be able to be vulnerable, be honest, but we have to be able to communicate with transparency so that closeness can be had. Mm-hmm. And like you said, there's such a good reminder, like, offenses are going to happen. They've happened in the past. They're going to happen again in the future. And, how are we able to communicate in a healthy manner that can bring us back together? Mm-hmm. And can we hear when that offense is coming our way, or perceived offense? Can we be able to pause? Can we step back and go, is there truth to what's being said to me? And are we able to respond in a way that we can remove the blinders?
Yeah.
And even if it hurts, to be able to go, hey, I can see your point. I can see why you brought this up, and I can use this to try to like bring us closer together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think for those that aren't married and maybe they have, hopes and dreams to be married someday, I think this is a good reminder that the idea of marriage is amazing. Everything that you think it is, it's even better than that. But it is work. And what God has for us in marriage has a very specific purpose, and definitely not the purpose that I thought when I went into marriage, right? And I would say I would encourage that anybody that's interested, and maybe you already have someone in mind, or you're with somebody, and maybe you're closer to maybe perhaps getting into a marriage relationship. I would encourage them to definitely seek that premarital counseling with their pastor, especially here, the premarital counseling with one of the pastors. And then if maybe you don't have anybody in mind and you're not seeing anybody, I think the conviction is, Jerry said this weekend, it's a calling. Most people will be called, but if you're in a stage of life where it's that's not on your mind, I think that's okay. I think later on, you might want to check in and see where you're being called to.
Yeah, I think that singleness in today's culture has almost been given like a negative connotation.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of benefits and freedom that comes from singleness, that you can really move in a freedom that you don't understand once you're married. You do understand, and if you have kids, more so, the conflicts of schedules, the sacrifices needed for others to accomplish what's taking place within the family. That a singleness and the beauty that there is in that can be a lot of wonderful work, kingdom work done in singleness, and that time can really be used to develop a closeness with God that can then be the backbone for a really healthy marriage if one was to come down the road for you. And it doesn't have to be a space where you're consistently going, God, when am I going to get married?
Yeah.
Because there's a freedom in that singleness where you can be developed and you can grow and you can do so many different things that a marriage and that a family will really alter and change because of the requirements that are needed in that different life stage.
Yep. Yeah, and I recalling the time when before I met Joy, there was a lot of freedom in being able to serve in the church. So you're able to serve a lot more because I had the time, and I know there may be some anxiousness, and as we, and back to you, what you were saying is, perhaps you're not a young chicken or a spring chicken anymore, and you're still wondering why, God hasn't, willed that relationship into marriage. And I think God's timing is perfect, right? He has somebody for you. I think it's just a matter of being in that mindset of waiting on the Lord, and in the meantime, you're doing what you need to do, what His plans are for you in the church and in your life. I think that there is an anxiousness, especially in a church body where like you said, it's kind of like, why aren't you married yet, right? And I think there's a perfect timing for that. And again, that it comes through a lot of the church community and the prayer. So as a church community, are we encouraging? Are we encouraging with the right mindset of marriage and how it's meant to be, knowing that it's work and we're trying to build oneness? If you talked about the third demographic of like maybe your kids are of age where they might be entering a stage of their life where they would think about or are getting tugged to get married. Are they? What kind of encouragement are they giving? How are they enabling that oneness if they're newlyweds and newly married, as like our older generation?
I think that the generation that has children that are newly married, or by newly married I mean 5 years or less, and or are in the process of getting married, understanding how are we coming alongside to encourage that separation, that leaving, right? The leaving and cleaving. Oh yeah, the leaving and the cleaving is really important, and I think at times, because I've talked to many people in that generation, there's a part of you that's always going to be sad that your kid's growing up and that your kid's making, their own life happen. And in that, sometimes we can make poor choices about how we still want the attention on us as a mom and a dad. And I think it's a really healthy concept to start thinking about, well, how am I pouring out to my kids so they know that I'm here to cheer them on, to hey, go pursue that marriage, go really develop it and grow into it and find the vast beauty that's in it when you really dive in fully to it. And I think we need more individuals and couples that are encouraging their children to jump into that oneness and to champion it and celebrate that, instead of saying, don't forget me. Hey, I'm over here. I need your attention. We all want attention. We're all attention seeking. But in that, we need to start having chats of, am I helping my children develop that oneness with their spouse, or am I demanding their attention to be pulled towards me and for there to be a split of their emotional capacity because I'm not willing to say I can be on the back burner?
Yeah. I do remember having a conversation with Joy about when we first got married, how do we do holidays, right? So I'm sure you had as well, especially with now that I left my family, started a new family with Joy. How do we start our own family traditions, or how do we start building our family with bits and pieces and flavors of the two families that have now merged? So having those conversations, I remember really meditating on how I can still honor my mother and my father as a newly married man, and yet still have my own family. There again, it goes back to there's going to be offenses because it's family. How do we remind ourselves in Matthew 18 to forgive, and how do we, if needed, how do we set up those proper boundaries? How do we continue to build our family and live our family with in a God-honoring fashion, and an ability to witness to that family if they're non-believers. And then on the flip side, if the grandparents are believers, how are they encouraging and lifting that new family and getting them off to a really healthy start, and enabling that new family to get off the right foot and not continue to cause them to stumble where they're supposed to be leaving.
I think that era isn't talked about enough ahead of time, in my opinion. Thinking back to premarital counseling, which was great, you don't know how challenging the initial phases of getting yourself into that oneness stage of, we've moved into a place together, and how are we living lives? What is routine? What's this closeness? Should I go drive to see my mom and dad today? And there isn't enough discussed about that challenge of developing your own family and developing, and how consistently in the beginning there's just so many how do we do this? Right?
And I think that looks differently. In one case, I think there was this, Heisman, right? You've left and you got to go figure it out on your own. So there's this actual forced leaving, right? The safety nets were cut off. You're your own family now. I've seen that happen. I've seen that work out very well. I've also seen the opposite, right? Where the parents, because of financial situations or whatever it was, they lived with one of the families. But even in that household, it worked well because there was this understanding of, but you're still a separate household, and they kind of lived together, maybe with the in-laws or what have you, but there was still that understanding. So I think it can look differently and on depending on the circumstances and the situation and the family members, but I think the mentality is as the father and the mother of the son or daughter that has been married, how are they encouraging and building up, and then on the flip side, as the daughter and the son, are they allowing themselves to leave, or are they still cleaving? Because it's not always on the parents either,
Yeah,
right?
that's very true.
Sometimes it's the children that have some difficulty of leaving, right? Because they'll still go back, right? Is the son still, submitting to his mother in certain things, or is the daughter still going to the dad for certain advice versus her new husband? So there's these there's dynamics just to be aware of, and I think it goes back to just thinking about the purpose of marriage, of how God has this plan so that we can grow individually with our new spouse, our spouse, that we become one. And I think it's a picture of our relationship with God in each for the other. It also talks about the fact that we, as two, are able to serve God in a different manner, in a pleasing way that we wouldn't have been able to do as individual. And I think Jerry highlights the very, very, very picture of the fact that oneness is in our children. If God blesses us with children, then obviously that's our ability to now serve Him and raise a life in a biblical way.
And I think when we point back to the sermon and what's being discussed here by Jesus to the Pharisees, he's pointing out the fact that we are, once again, a lifelong.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't just the idea isn't that it's good until it's not, and then I'll see you later, I'm out of here. Right. This is like a lifelong building of that oneness. And we talked about this offline about, like, if you're even mentally opening the door to divorce, we're in the wrong mindset.
Yeah.
Right.
Or like the Pharisees, they're looking for what are the grounds for divorce. If you're looking for excuses of what would allow this, you're already in the wrong space, right? Yeah. You're in the wrong headspace.
Yeah.
There's no retreat. In fact, we were last week we were in on the East Coast for a wedding, and I was joking with the father of the bride, and I asked him, like, what did he say? At the altar, like he said to the groom, no returns, right? Like, I'm like, oh, that's perfect. Yeah, like, no, if you're going going into a marriage relationship and you're going to commit in God's eyes and have Him recognize the marriage, there's no retreat, right? I mean, obviously the sermon we talked about the uncleanliness, but that's again because of our hardened hearts and our shortcomings as being able to forgive perfectly.
Well, and Jesus is emphasizing in Matthew 19 reconciliation. Mm-hmm. He's emphasizing humility and heart change over separation.
Yeah.
Right? And when we think about, like, how we're developing oneness, when we get back to this is a really good, healthy point of how marriages sustain is the development of oneness. I think one of the areas that is a very practical way that can be overlooked or can just be challenging is, are we cultivating humility in conflict, right? Because so often we can get into a space in that spousal situation where we just want to, quote unquote, win arguments, right? Like, I want to be the lawyer, and I'm going to set this up to where no matter how I make you feel, I'm going to win this argument.
Yeah.
And in that is our pride, is this separation feeling, because if you have to lift yourself, you have to lower someone else in that process. Yeah. And I think when we're thinking about humility, it's like, are we practicing listening well? Yeah. Like, just listening to listen, not listening to respond.
Yeah.
Right? I think is such a big difference. Are we being accountable and admitting fault? I know that has been a struggle that I'm working on in that space. And are we offering apologies? I'm once again, these are great for me because I need to be a better apologizer.
Both of us, yeah.
And I think when we are doing those things, I think the humility disarms that cycle of hardness of the hearts that we are going through.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and there's no better opportunity than in the marriage covenant that allows that safe space to be able to be super vulnerable and like you said, lay all the cards out, but with somebody you trust that has also made the same commitment to you, right? And that's the beauty. Like I said, like when I was younger and I had this idea of marriage, and of course I wanted to get married and have kids, God put that on my heart. But I had no idea what kind of an intimate relationship there existed in a marriage bond, because there's safety there. There is trust there. There's that intimacy, knowing that we are helping each other get to heaven, right? We're helping each other not just stumble across the finish line, but we are holding each other's hand and sprinting it through. You know, if we get there at different times, that's okay, right? And that's all part of God's plan. That's not something I'm worried about. But while we're here, that's absolutely something that is both of our goals, which is, hey, let's not cause our lives to be a stumbling block for each other, and let's help each other get there in a sprint. Yeah. Right. With steam behind us.
And just I love the picture you paint there, because the intimacy you're speaking of, it's not just a physical one. Yeah. It's a spiritual one. It's an emotional one. I loved what you pointed out earlier, like praying together, dreaming together, discussing fears together, the ability to connect over those things and to really further strengthen that oneness we spoke about. It comes through those different layers of intimacy. And so it's, marriages thrive on so much more than just physical closeness.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Cornerstone, we didn't focus on the divorce part for a reason, because I think the understanding of marriage is more important than the escape clause, because that's all it is. It's an escape, and it was never intended to be there, but because of our fallenness and our hardened hearts, God allowed this, or allowed Moses to have to share as a permission, not a command, so that we wouldn't continue stumbling, right? Because if we're in that and we're not going to soften our heart's going to be hardened, and this is going to continue to help cause us to stumble all the way where we're just tripping over the finish line. He much rather us just go ahead. And again, it's because of uncleanliness, right? And Jerry, again, we won't cover that. Jerry covered that excellently over the weekend, but I think the focus here is marriage is good. It is more than good. There is so much goodness in marriage that we don't understand, that we just need to allow ourselves to fully absorb what God has planned for us in our marriage. So for the married couples, I think this week would be a great time to just have a really good chat of like, what can I be praying for you about? What's been on your mind? What's God been teaching you, right? And then for like the single folks that are either in a relationship but not married, or maybe not in a relationship, maybe this is a good time to kind of reflect on your parents' marriage, and see where God's tugging on you and calling for being married or single. And then for the older generation, how are they helping the younger generation in our church, or even their sons and daughters, to have that oneness in their marriage?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think?
I think that these are just healthy constructs that, if we can focus on the simplicity of God's design, man and woman married together, cleaving to each other, if we can believe our partners have the best intent for us, if we can communicate with transparency and do so in a sacrificial, loving way where we can see how we can benefit one another for God's kingdom, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Amen.
All right, Cornerstone family, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week, where we finish off chapter 19 in Matthew.
Thank you so much for joining us for our leading podcast, and may you be blessed in your doing as you put the Word of God into action this coming week.